The modern publicly held corporation is a very funny thing. And now we have a business, could be a huge multinational business with thousands upon thousands of employees, all directed towards making a product or providing a service, but ultimately for the sake of profit. With huge infrastructures, long histories, and famous executives. But the owners are nowhere to be found. That is, the whole idea of a publicly held corporation is that it is a business that has basically sold itself in shares to the public, and that whoever owns shares of that company is an owner of that company, and the collective owners of all the shares are the collective owners of the company. That is a very funny thing. I mean, we so naturally identify at least some of the more famous corporate executives with the business itself. Steve Jobs, the late Steve Jobs, being maybe the most prominent current example, or Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook and things like that. But they're once they've sold that business, once they've gone public, they are not the owners. The owners are the shareholders. And it seemed to me that Milton Friedman had a very, very simple idea in social responsibility of businesses to increase profits, and that is that any executive of any publicly held corporation is simply an employee, an agent, who does the will of the owners of the business, no different from a privately held business, being an employee of a privately held business, that you have a boss. That business does not exist for you and your enrichment. That business exists for the shareholders and whatever they want out of it. And the whole idea was, I think, the main idea, Friedman's basic idea, was that doing anything else but the presumed will of the shareholders was really, I don't know if you'd call it immoral or improper or just altogether unfitting to the role of an agent. That is, the presumption is that the shareholders want to maximize their profits, the profits they gain by holding shares of the company in the form of dividends and stock price, and that any executive or any employee of the company would have to follow that end. So to commit the resources of the corporation to any other cause would be a form of illegitimate taxation. That is, taking away of the property in the form of profits of those shareholders. Of course, we have a different idea here in Etzioni's Stakeholder theory essay, and it is really in the name of the essay there, the whole idea of the stakeholder. But there are some really prominent similarities. That is, one of the things that Etzioni says is that the whole idea of the shareholder and the rights of the shareholder and fairness to the shareholder is something that he accepts. And it's the whole idea of investment. That is, when somebody buys shares in a company, it's not a discrete sale. It's not a one-off sale where you buy something and the person who sells it to you then relinquishes all title or say over that property, and it's a discrete sale. When you buy a stock in a company, you are looking to the future. That is, that you're not just buying something to consume. When you invest, you are giving up some of your property in exchange for something that you hope will come in the future. That is, there's a payoff in the future, and investment is different from simply buying something. Buying a share in a company is not like buying a quart of milk or even an automobile. It's different. And the difference is the expectation of returns in the future. And what goes along with that expectation or that rationale for buying the share an expectation of gains in the future is some say, some influence over the running of that company. In the meantime, that is, you basically invested your money in something, you should have some say in how the corporation is run, or at least you'd have some safeguards. So Etzioni accepts that, fully accepts that shareholders have perhaps the major and most important claim in having influence over the way a business, a publicly held business, is run. But the really crucial idea here, I guess, in Etzioni's essay, is they're not the only ones. And they're not the only ones because there's not only one form of investment. That is, when you invest in a company, you invest your money, your wealth, your capital. But the idea here is, and it's a very interesting idea, and I don't know, what you think of it, but that's up to you. But the idea here is that there are different forms of investment, and that there are people who have invested maybe not money into a corporation, but maybe other things. And maybe they have invested money, but they have no legal property rights in the way that the shareholder has property rights, but they've invested something in the company. And he mentions 4 different stakeholders, that is, parties that have a stake in the running of the company because they've invested something in it. Employees, the community, creditors, and clients. And I think that it's clear from, his discussion that the 2 most important parties here that he's most, at least the parties that he's most concerned with, are employees and the community in the way in which they invest in corporations, with that same expectation where they invest their, well, in the case of employees, their time, their effort, their dedication, with an expectation of being paid off in the future. That is, a delayed gratification, a delayed payoff in that. Paid off in the future, at least in the form of continuing employment, continuing flow of wages and benefits, as he says. That is, the really interesting idea here. And it is interesting to read it in conjunction, or read it right after having read Friedman's essay. Because in one way, as I tried to argue, it's very similar. It's an extension of this notion of shareholder rights, the kind of investment rights, one might say, that shareholders have, that to grant those or similar investment rights to other parties that may not have contributed money or don't have legal title to the company in the form of shares and owners, but they've invested their effort, their time, and in the case of the community, their resources. He talks about tax breaks, building infrastructure to lure companies or to keep companies in the community and things like that. So in one sense, it is simply an extension of what Friedman said, except that it's something that Friedman probably would have no time for, I would imagine. I don't know. It would sound too much like socialism to him, I guess. But really something that really builds on the Friedman idea that executives really they are the employees, and they have to respond to the desires and wants of those whom they work for. But at the same time, there is a real departure, obviously, from Friedman. Friedman, we have this notion that the executive really has no choice, that his or her conscience really has nothing to do with it, because they're just an agent, they're just an employee. I don't think that Etzioni, from what he says about the way the corporations are actually run and the sort of passive way that owners of shares in a company usually behave, I don't think that he would really give it that much credence. That is, I think he would say that executives of companies have considerable leeway to act. So it's an interesting idea. I think it's an interesting thing to read after Friedman.